Doo-doo-doo-doo. Hey, kia ora, Helen Brahms here coming to you live for Genealogy and History on May 9th. Hope you're all having a super fantastic sparkling day. So, what interesting things do we have in history for you today? Ooh, we'll have to have a look and see. But we have some people like, oh, hang on, I wrote down my list. Gotta check my list. We've got the crown jewels going to be make a feature today. So does John Hancock, Lord Byron, Reno, Nevada, Buffalo Bill, and laser beams. Ooh. So what happened with all of that stuff on this day in history? So we're ready to get in there and find out and see if there is any connections to your family tree through the events that happen or the people that are mentioned. So let's dive right in. We're going to be starting in 1502 and going through to 2019. Yes, that's going to be a very fun one, the 2019 one. So stay tuned. And it's not that long ago. I mean, it was only a couple of years ago, but it's worth a mention. Anyway, so let's get started. Let's see. We've got Crown Jewels, John Hancock, Lord Byron, Reno, Nevada, Buffalo Bill, and laser beams making an appearance on this day in history. So let's dive right in and see. We'll start with 1502. And in 1502, Christopher Columbus left Spain on his fourth and final trip to the New World. In 1671, Colonel Thomas Blood attempts to steal the crown jewels of England and Scotland from the Tower of London. Now, I've heard there's been many attempts over the years. I'm not sure if any of them have actually been successful, but he was captured running from the tower with the jewels. Those things must be under real good security guards, but I know there's many people that have tried over the years from things that I have read in history and come across in history. So in 1726, should I find out what happens when you try to steal the crown jewels? Because I mean, those things are like those pieces are just history all by themselves. If you think about, the stones and when they recreate the crowns, how they're using stones from past crowns. When they remake some of the crowns, the tiaras, there's history behind the stones that are in the crowns and the tiaras and the other pieces of the crown jewels. They all have some historical significance in them, and it's actually quite fascinating learning about the history of some of the crown jewels. Maybe one of these days we'll do a genealogy and history just on the crown jewels. That's a good one. Crown jewels genealogy 101. Maybe we'll have to look at that one. Anyway, moving on from 1671 to 1726, when 3 men were arrested during a February raid on Mother Clapp's Molly House. And this was a coffee house that catered to homosexuals in London, and they were executed by hanging at Tyburn in England. This was in 1726. Yeah, that one just astounded me. So that one was actually kind of interesting. But anyway, we're doing a raid. Wow. What kind of happens? Yeah. 1726, huh? Wow. That's awesome. In 1738, Britain sends a fleet to the Mediterranean seas and the West Indies. Not sure what they were doing down there, but they got sent on their way anyway. In 1754, the first newspaper cartoon in America, Divided Snake, Join or Die. I have no idea what that is. I'm going to have to go look that one up. In 1766, John Byron got back to England after a trip around the world. Now, I can't remember if that's before they discovered that it was round or that trip helped them discover the world was round instead of flat. Sometime around that area. 1768, John Hancock, who, as we all know, was the first signer of the Declaration of Independence, and he said he made his name big enough that the King of England would know who it was that signed that document. But that has nothing to do with what took place on May 9th in 1768. John Hancock pays duties on 25 pipes of wine, only 1/4 of his ship's carrying capacity. The British officials accuse him of unloading the rest during the night to avoid paying duties on the entire cargo. Man, that stuff's been going around a long time. How can you skip paying taxes and duties on stuff that you're importing? But 1768, they suspected John Hancock of unloading it during the night to avoid paying, but he only paid for a quarter of what he's capable of carrying. Interesting. In 1785, British inventor Joseph Bramha, got it. Joseph Bramha patents beer pump handle. The beer pump handle. Ooh. So it's amazing how when we're going through this history and finding these patents for things that you didn't realize were around for so long, like I didn't know they had beer pump handles in 1785. I thought that would have been like a lot later, like maybe late 1800s, early 1900s, but nope, 1785, that was patent. And it's like some of these other patents, as we're going through the days, they come out, and I'm sort of like, wow, that's been around a really long time. A lot later than you actually anticipated. In 1816, Lady Caroline Lamb publishes the Gothic novel Glen. Oh, jeepers! I do it properly when I get on here. I can't talk. Glenarvon, a thinly disguised account of her affair with Lord Byron, which also depicts her husband William Lamb. Now, William Lamb is an interesting character. He went on to have Melbourne, to name the Australian city Melbourne was named after him. So I've got to go read some more of that story too. In 1862, the U.S. Naval Academy relocated from Annapolis, Maryland to Newport, Rhode Island. So like, well, hang a sec, it's in Annapolis now, so at some point it's transferred back. Gotta go research that one too. See, today when I'm not on the computer, for Sundays when I'm not on the computer, I don't go to a lot of research on things. So we'll report back on that one. In 1765, President Andrew Johnson issued a proclamation declaring armed resistance in the South as virtually at an end, and this is the commonly accepted end date for the American Civil War. And then we have to give a big happy birthday today to the city of Reno, Nevada, because it was founded on this day in 1868. In 1874, the first horse-drawn bus makes its debut in the city of Mumbai, plying 2 different routes. In 1882, Telegraph Hill R.R. Co., otherwise known as cable cars, in San Francisco was organized. In 1887, Buffalo Bill Cody's Wild West show opened in London. In 1896, the first horseless carriage show in London featured 10 models. In 1896, 10 different models of horseless carriages. That was a lot back then. That was a lot. In 1899, John Burr patents an improved rotary blade lawnmower in the U.S. In 1901, and I did not realize, Australia's been around for a long time, but this one hit me. It was sort of like, really? So in 1901, on May 9th, 1901, the first Australian Parliament opens in Melbourne, though the first working session would not be held until the 21st of May. The first Australian Parliament, with Edmund Barton as the Prime Minister, was opened in Melbourne by Prince George, Duke of Cornwall and York, later to become King George V. It followed elections at the end of March with the establishment of the Commonwealth of Australia on the 1st of January 1901. Barton headed a coalition government composed of his own protectionist party, but with crucial support from the Australian Labor Party. The official opening was attended by 14,000 people and had to be held in the Royal Exhibition Hall to accommodate them. The Parliament then sat in Parliament House, home to the Parliament of Victoria, which is the territory that Melbourne is in, until 1927, when the new Parliament buildings were opened in Canberra. Canberra is now known as the capital of Australia. And this is gonna just remember this little story because it's going to come back in a couple of minutes. In 1904, the steam locomotive City of Truro becomes the first steam engine to exceed 100 miles an hour. It's in 1904. Didn't realize they had engines around that went that fast at that time. In 1922, the International Astronomical Union formally adopted Annie Jump Cannon's stellar classification system, which with only minor changes is still in use today. Now, the Annie Jump Cannon is a very interesting woman. She was a pioneering female astronomer who invented the stellar classification system, and she was the first woman to receive an honorary doctorate from Oxford University in 1925. And another interesting fact about her is that her birthday is December the 11th, 1863. You're probably going, well, why is that important? Because 80 years later on that date, my mum was born. So, yeah. But Annie Jump Cannon passed when she was 77, so she passed 3 years earlier in 1941. But my mum was born December the 11th, 1943. It's 80 years later, right? Yeah. I just had to say in 1925, the cornerstone of Hebrew University in Jerusalem was laid. I love hearing about cornerstones being laid. I think it's great because then you know that if you know the history behind the building, and there's so many different forms of genealogy, and one of the specialities in genealogy is the genealogy of a house or a building. So you actually have genealogists out there who specialize in researching the history behind the houses or behind buildings, and that's part of a genealogist is the genealogy of a building, and especially with houses, they learn about the different families who lived there and who lived in that house during that time period, and they create their family trees based on the people who were living in the house at certain time periods throughout history. So you can learn about families who have lived in the house. How long did they live there? How many children did they have? Grandchildren? How, based on the length of time that they were in there, who in their family lived in the house with them? Was it just the nuclear family, your mum, dad, and the kids? Or was it aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, great-grandparents, all of that sort of stuff as well? So genealogy of a house is actually a niche, a speciality in genealogy. So there's another little tidbit for you. And the same goes with buildings. Who was in this building? What was it used for? In 1926, the first flight over the North Pole was claimed by Richard E. Byrd and co-pilot Floyd Bennett. Later, however, the discovery of Byrd's diary suggested that they may have turned back 150 miles short of the pole due to an oil leak. Now, Richard E. Byrd is also known for also being the first man to fly over the South Pole. So that one comes later in history, but it is the same person that supposedly did both. In 1927, now remember we were talking about the Australian Parliament being formed in 1901. So 26 years later, on 1927, Canberra replaces Melbourne as the capital of Australia, and the Australian Parliament convenes there for the first time. So they're celebrating the 26th birthday of the Parliament being formed. They're also convening in their new location in Canberra for the very first time. But wait, there's more coming on this one. In 1932, Piccadilly Circus in London was first lit by electricity. In 1941, British intelligence at Bletchley Park breaks the German spy codes after capturing Enigma machines aboard the weather ship München. In 1943, Rothschild Hadash University Hospital opens. Herring Hospital opens. And then you find out that it's still around today. It's kind of cool. In 1946, King Victor Emmanuel III of Italy abdicates and is succeeded by his son, Umberto II, who reigns for only 34 days before the monarchy is abolished. In 1949, Britain's first laundromat opens in Queensway, London. Laundrette, yeah. In 1949, Prince Rainier III becomes monarch of Monaco. In 1958, Vertigo, the American film psychothriller directed by Alfred Hitchcock, starring Jimmy Stewart and Kim Novak, is released. And I've never seen the movie Vertigo, but I've seen shots of it when you go to Universal Studios in LA. They're walking you through the back scenes and all that. They have different areas where they show you how they shot some of the things and have volunteers from the audience go and do things like, gripping onto the side of the building, and from the movie Vertigo, and then and you see them standing there holding on to the grips of these ledges and things, but on the screen you see what the actual scene looks like, and things like that. And it was either my oldest stepson or my brother-in-law who participated in that as part of the behind-the-scenes thing in Universal Studios. In 1960, the US becomes the first country to legalize the birth control pill. In 1962, laser beams successfully bounced off the moon for the first time. How did they know it hit the moon and got bounced? I don't know, just these little questions that just pop up when I read history. In 1974, U.S. House of Representatives Judiciary Committee begins formal hearings on the Nixon impeachment. In 1988, now remember, we've been talking about Australia and their first government being formed, it moving to Canberra for its capital. Now we're back to that story again. 1988, so it was first formed in 1901. In 1926, it moved to Canberra from Melbourne. And so now we're fast forward to 1988 for the Australian Parliament, and Australia's new Parliament House is opened by Queen Elizabeth II in Canberra. In 1992, and I know this one's gonna, but thank goodness we have reruns. The final episode of Golden Girls airs on NBC TV. I love that show. It has to be one of my top comedy shows, right up there with I Love Lucy. I just love the quick one-liners that are in there, and yes, just the sarcasm and it's those one-liners and how well they are delivered. And of course, you've got some great actresses in that show as well. And also on this day in 1992, the Salem Village Witchcraft Victims Memorial was dedicated in Danvers, formerly Salem Village, to mark the 300-year anniversary of the trials. Now, the trials started in February of 1692 and went through to, I think it was September of that year or September the following year. But we're going to learn more about that one later on in history as they come around. On this day in 2012, Mark Rothko's Orange, Red, Yellow, which is a painting, for those that don't know, becomes the most expensive contemporary art piece to be sold at auction for $86.9 million. I was like, what? So I went and looked it up, and I was sort of like, okay, there's times I get art and sometimes I don't. And this was one of those pieces I don't get. There was a block of red, a block of orange, and a block of yellow. Oh, hang on. No, there was a... Yeah, if you go look up Orange, Red, Yellow by Mark Rothko, you'll see the piece there, and I was sort of like, Okay, and the last one for this one, on this day in 2019, and this is a real cringe one, the new Australian $50 banknote misspells responsibility. It left out the third I, the one that comes between the L and the T. So if you're spelling out responsibility, it should be responsibility. On the note, it's missing that I between the L and the T. And they misspelled it on 46 million notes, which is around $2.3 billion. But apparently, for when they do any reprints of the $50, the mistake has been corrected. And from somebody who has done publishing in the past with proofreading things, I know that nothing is never, ever 100% correct on proofreading. I mean, you read books that have been through proofreader after proofreader after proofreader, and there's always some mistakes to be found somewhere along the way. When I was in the Air Force, part of my job was working publications production, and we were getting numbers and figures from the officers to update the manuals, and they were talking about degrees or ohms or whatever electrical thingy that you can think of that has numbers. If one of those numbers were off, it could crash a plane. So the detail we had to go through to get that publication done. So we had the stuff coming from the officer. We would type it all up, and then we would format the document. It would then be proofread by 3 people in our room, the person who wrote it, the person who did the typing up, and then they had to get 2 others to verify it. And then it went back to the office where the people who had originally sent us the document had to go through everything with a fine-tooth comb. It came back for any corrections. Corrections were done. Original person had to proofread it. 2 other people had to proofread it. It went back to the office again. And sometimes they would go backwards and forwards like about 8 or 9 times until everybody was satisfied that it was correct and all the numbers were correct. We actually had a Skyhawk, which is one of our fighter jets, crash during a training run one time. And our warrant officer comes in, he says, everybody stop everything you're doing right now. He says, save whatever you need to save. He says, I want all records relating to, told us exactly what he wanted. It was relating to the aircraft, because one of the things they do when an aircraft crashes is they go through the manuals, they go through the documentation, they go through all the amendments that were done, because we kept track of everything that we did along the way. So all of that got went through with a fine-tooth comb by all the investigators and everything else. So we had to make sure those numbers were correct. But when you look at how small the type is on the $50 note where the word responsibility is, it is so tiny. I mean, I saw a picture of it on the thing, and I still had to go like this to enlarge it on the screen to see the actual thing, because the time, and this was a picture that was, a decent sized piece of the picture, but the writing was so tiny, it's like in, I don't know, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3 or something. I don't know. It's really, really tiny writing. But for somebody to pick up the fact that that word had been spelled incorrectly was sort of like, wow. But then I don't know how big the proofs are that they get to read first before they reduce them down to fit on the $50 bill. But on the back is a picture of the woman, the first, what was she? What was her name? Can't think of her name, but she was like the first elected female official or something. And there was a quote that she had said, and they had typed that quote in, and responsibility was in there. But like I said, when you go see the picture of it and you blow it up on your screen, you got to blow it up really big, and you can just make out the spelling error. So the fact that somebody's now gone back after they printed 46 million notes and found that error, it's so like, wow. Because, if you have a look at the writing on the back, it's tiny. It's tiny, 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 tiny. You need a microscope on a microscope to read that stuff. But anyway, so that's our day in history. Who in your family tree was participating in any of these events, maybe the historical figure in question in these historical events that took place. It's always fun to go back into your family tree and see where were your relatives living at times when different events took place. Was there a chance that any of them could have been involved in the thing, involved in any part of it or anything like that? And so if you would like assistance with your family tree, finding out these stories, finding out more about history and how it connects to your family, please go to helenconnects.com. The link is in the description, and set up a time for us to chat. So that's it for us for today, for May 9th, on this day of genealogy and history. Go have a super fantastic sparkling day, and we will see you back here tomorrow for May 10th. Hei konara.